Yes, all trains are running right on time. Thank you. All aboard for fun and learning with another episode of Betamax Blocker's Rare VHS Releases. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the work of stand-up comic George Carlin, his many HBO specials, and a few of his acting roles. We talked about the movie Americathon on here before, whatnot, Bill and Ted, all that kind of stuff. But for many of us, especially if you're a child of the late 80s, the 90s, and maybe even the early 00s, you would know George Carlin for something completely different. And I thought, you know what? For today, looking at some of these rare VHS releases, why don't we look at a TV show instead of a film? And the introduction of George Carlin's material to many young people, including myself, his work on Shining Time Station. I thought Shining Time Station would be a good topic to cover. We've done silent films and we've done some odds and ends like The Keep and Disraeli and Buddy Buddy. So I thought, Shining Time Station had a pretty lucrative run on VHS tapes, releasing many different volumes. I figured I'd split it in half today, but there are quite a few to talk about. For those of you who don't know, Shining Time Station was the introduction of Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends to the United States. The first season of Thomas and Friends was released in England in 1984, followed up by season 2 in 1986. However, the third season didn't come along till 1991 due to two different side projects. One was the TV show Tugs, which has achieved kind of a cult status. It was not appreciated in its time. It was not successful, lasting a season of, I think, 13 episodes. And there are many, many excellent videos on YouTube about the history of Tugs and why it didn't succeed and so on. That's not really the subject of today. I don't even think it got to the U.S. And that's interesting stuff, too. A lot of the technical crew of Thomas worked on that. But the production lady, Britt Allcroft, the woman in charge, she had a different idea of how to introduce Thomas to the U.S., figuring that although it was big in the U.K. and will be very big in Japan, she wanted that U.S. market. And so she came up with Shining Time Station, which used kind of the story of a station house in, anywhere USA as sort of a base plate for these Thomas stories. They'd be woven into a larger narrative with different characters and whatnot. So mostly human interaction, but then as Thomas episodes run about 5 minutes, they'd be able to jump into that very quickly. Those of you who, like me, children of the 90s, might remember the Shining Time Station Sunshine logo on the VHS releases you can see up there in the corner. And this meant that the United States got the Thomas stories in a completely different release order than they were intended. So if you're like me as a little boy in the 90s, buying the VHS tapes at Kmart or wherever, they'd usually be kind of a random jumble of episodes because they were designed to match these stories from these Shining Time Station episodes. And Shining Time Station was very successful in its day on PBS, even winning a Daytime Emmy. In the next video, we'll talk more about its legacy today because it really doesn't have one. Kind of lived and died. So most of the VHS tapes we're going to talk about today were released in the early mid-90s, the first from 1992, the remainder from about 1994. So I thought today we'd jump in there and see what we could find out about Thomas. Did you know the 1999 VHS release 10 Years of Thomas wasn't talking about 10 years of the show, but rather talking about 10 years since Shining Time Station had aired. So why is this so important? Well, let's put on our magical whistles and conductor uniforms and find out. So, George Carlin is most noted as Mr. Conductor today, and one of those stand-up specials I just showed you, he talked about how it gave him an insight to children, with the famous joke, "This is Mr. Conductor, I know what I'm talking about," before he does his anti-child rant. And, but before he was Mr. Conductor, this obscure musician named Ringo Starr, seen there, took the role for a while, and he narrated Thomas the Tank Engine stories for British TV, and he played Mr. Conductor. Only one of his episodes made it to VHS in the US. I believe Shining Time Station only aired in the US and Canada. It was produced in Canada. Here's a 1992 copy of the Christmas special, "'Tis a Gift." You can see Ringo as Mr. Conductor there on the yellow bulb. Lloyd Bridges on the red one, and 2 of the Shining Time crew, Stacy and Schemer, on the blue one. So, I know it's weird to review a Christmas special this time of year. Maybe this Christmas we'll talk more about it. This is the same VHS tape I've had since I was a little boy. I think I got this for Christmas in like 1993 or 1994. Pretty cool. So this is a little bit different, though. This was made between the show's first and second seasons, and so there's some weird casting choices. It has most of the original cast, except for Leonard Jackson, who played Harry the engineer. Today he's probably best remembered for his work as Whoopi Goldberg's abusive stepfather in Steven Spielberg's adaptation of The Color Purple. But he wasn't available for this holiday special, so they got an actor named Arden Best to play the part. Why they even got Best, I don't know, because they don't give him anything to do. He only has a couple lines, and most of them purely expository. But I think kids would find this story very relatable. Matt and Tanya, our 2 juvenile leads, have to play with Vicky, the really bratty, aloof girl, drives everyone crazy, and of course, through the magic of Christmas, find out that she's not so bad after all. So it is a maudlin, kind of mawkish Christmas story, but you could do a lot worse. I think this hits a lot of good story beats. It has a couple really tender scenes. You can get away with excessive sentimentality in Christmas programs in my eyes. And this is the only one featuring Ringo, again, to get a home video release. Pretty cool. But the real highlight is Lloyd Bridges as Mr. Nicholas, this mysteriously benevolent man who turns up at the station requesting a train to the North Pole that doesn't exist. No great plot twist who he actually turns out to be, of course, but it's interesting because when you think about Lloyd Bridges at this time in his career, we're talking things like Airplane, or Mafia, or Hot Shots 1 and 2. So it's interesting to see him here playing a very kind of restrained, friendly part. And he has really good chemistry with the rest of the cast. I kind of wish they brought him back for something else too, because he is the absolute highlight here, comforting people and whatnot. Definitely the main reason to watch. And of course there are 2 Thomas stories, because every Shining Time station has to have at least one. Some of 1, some of 2. And both of them were taken from the show's finale episodes. They're Christmas episodes. The finale to Season 1, Thomas's Christmas Party. Finale to Season 2, Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree. Interestingly enough, in the original syndication, they used different stories. Christmas Party was moved to the second slot, I believe, and the story Thomas Terrence in the Snow, or Terrence the Tractor, if you're in the US, was substituted in its place. And this is bizarre. Honestly, the intros, these episodes, the excuses to work them into the narrative, are written broadly enough that it really isn't noticeable, but it is kind of strange. Not sure why they changed them. I should also note that Ringo Starr didn't redub the Thomas and the Missing Christmas Tree episode, so it's like an edited version where they bleep out dialogue that has like British terms in it. And so there's these weird pauses. It's not so distracting it takes you out of the episode, but it's certainly bizarre. There's some weird filler in here too, like a lot of children's shows. Shining Time Station had its share of just filler moments. They took a lot of public domain cartoons and made little music videos out of them, things like that. But there's this very long one about a little boy, I guess, fantasizing about a train trip and meeting a hobo on there who's lonely at Christmas time, but the hobo might be him when he's an adult or something. I don't know. I didn't quite follow it, but all told, for a schmaltzy Christmas, sentimental journey, it's pretty fun. It's nice to see Ringo in the role of Mr. Conductor. So let's jump into some that are broader now. Take a look at the ones with George Carlin. Leonard Jackson left the show, Arden Best did not return, and Tom Jackson, the Cree actor from Canada, he did that movie with Liam Neeson where they're having gunfights in the Yukon over drugs or something recently. I forget what that movie's called, but he joined the show as Billy Two Feathers, the engineer. So that was one of the big casting shakeups, and the children, Matt and Tanya, were replaced by 3 children, Kara, Becky, and Dan. So here's our first episode. This is from the 3rd season, Stacy Cleans Up. This is the worst one of all the VHS releases. I was not impressed with this at all. I'm sure I watched it as a little boy, but I didn't really remember it. Bought this at a thrift store. You can see the thrift store tag there. Maybe I was like 25 or 26 with morbid curiosity. I was like, I should see what this is like. I was not impressed. So a garbage train is parked in the station and stinking up the place, and the local landfill is closed, so there's nowhere to put the garbage. And the engineer, who's this Scotsman, played very well by Michael Poley, is very frustrated because people keep telling him to get the train out but not where to go. And what could be an interesting story about, dealing with the closure or the discontinuation of an important service, or it could have been a commentary about working dirty jobs. We need people to do dirty jobs. Appreciate the jobs that other people do, especially if you couldn't do them yourself. But no, we don't get any of that. Instead, we get a very ham-fisted recycling story that, oh, the garbage will disappear if we just recycle it. And that made me really mad because it's implied a lot of the garbage is food waste. And you can't recycle food waste. This feels like one of those BuzzFeed stories where they'd say, recycling is the biggest lie ever perpetrated to the American people and so on. So I was not impressed. Admittedly, the filler tried to be pretty relevant. There's a song about pitching in and doing your share. The Thomas story featured is James Goes Buzz Buzz. See here, this is the same VHS tape I got for my birthday in like 1994 or so. Somewhere there's a picture of my father holding me up to blow the candles out on my cake, and this VHS tape is next to me. But interestingly enough, all the stories we're going to talk about today are on this video. But James Goes Buzz Buzz, of course, is famous for that image I just showed you on the VHS box, but it doesn't really fit with this story. They connect it by saying, oh, all these flies buzzing around reminds me of the time, an engine had trouble with bees, and it's like, yeah, you couldn't do any better than that, come on. Don't write down or talk down to the kids, that's not cool. But yeah, I was not impressed. This one's pretty skippable. I think you can find all of the VHS ones on YouTube, I'm pretty sure you can. Alright, next up, Volume 2, Schemer Alone, also called Schemers Alone, because that's what the title card in the episode says. Pretty cool stuff. I should note that with the exception of the Tis a Gift VHS tape I showed you at the beginning, all of these have little extras as well. There's little advertisements for the imaginary businesses around Shining Time Station at the beginning. There's a little Schemer segment at the end. Schemer, of course, being the opposite of Mr. Conductor. George Carlin once said Mr. Conductor was a less than child-sized adult. Schemer is an adult-sized child, but he gets a little comedy sketch at the end of each video and whatnot. So in this story, Schemer, the epitome of being a man-child, his mother, who usually takes care of him and dotes on him, goes out of town, so he tries paying other people to do the things his mother would do for him, but not actually paying them, just giving them a worthless IOU instead, and all the trouble that ensues. It kind of almost has like 90s or 2000s romantic comedy vibes to it. This man-child who can't do anything for himself, is completely dependent on his parents and whatnot. It's interesting. And I did find a lot of the gags worked pretty well. The Thomas story featured, you can see there on the back, Percy James and the Fruitful Day, which was the conclusion to that video I just showed you there. Remember, some of these episodes were jumbled around to match the Shining Time Station running order. It's tied in a little bit better about how, passing off jobs on someone else results in difficult situations and whatnot. I thought that was okay. Really, the only drawback to this is some of the filler's pretty weird. There's a song they wrote specially, I believe, for this episode, which is pretty catchy about being independent, but they put it to what looks like B-roll footage from diaper commercials and toddlers' toy commercials and things like that. And it's a very strange watch. There's a Brutal Moose video where he's watching like 90s ads and this weird diaper commercial comes on, he's fast forwards to it. That's exactly what I did here. Was not exactly what I wanted to watch as an adult. 10 of 10 would not recommend. But other than that, it's actually a really fun and a cute episode. Again, written for children, but not so juvenilely, not so mawkishly that an adult couldn't enjoy it too. Our last one for today, and then we'll do a little sneak peek of the next installment of this series here, which will be out in a few weeks, is Bully for Mr. Conductor. You see Volume 3 on the side. They didn't count Tis a Gift as Volume 1. It was kind of its own standalone thing. So Stacy Cleans Up as 1, Schemer Alone as 2, and this as 3. I think every children's show at one time or another deals with bullying as a plot point, and Shining Time Station, of course, being no exception. J.B. King, the superintendent of the railway, comes to visit and asks the children to entertain and play with his young nephew, Buster, but Buster turns out to be a bully and really obnoxious, making fun of his uncle behind his back, drawing on the walls, and so on. Pretty predictable stuff. Dan, of course, is afraid to stand up to him. Dan, played by Ari Magder, who sadly passed away a few years ago. The Train of Thought channel has a terrific Shining Time Station reunion podcast, and all of the child actors at least made some appearance or pre-recorded a segment or whatever, but sadly Ari Magder passed away, so he could not be a part of it. But he does really good in this episode too. He's afraid to stand up to Buster until Buster threatens Mr. Conductor, and he does stand up to him, and it's very convincing, and I think a moral that kids could take away. Sometimes we might let someone push us around, but if they're going to push around someone who's weaker than us or can be easily taken advantage of, we might stand up to them and might have courage that we don't even realize we had. And I thought that worked pretty well. You know, it's nothing groundbreaking. Other shows have done the same thing, I'm sure. But pretty good to see. Thomas' story is Bulgy. You can see it on the list there too, which is also one about bullying in this case. Bulgy's a big jerk, so that works. And, you know, like I said, nothing groundbreaking. Uses a lot of public domain cartoons to have a little filler song bit. I do really like the version of Jamaica Farewell. The Shining Time Station episodes usually have a musical number done by puppets, the jukebox band. I think they're the Flexi Tune puppets. They're kind of creepy, but I do like the stuff they do with the music, and the version of Jamaica Farewell in here is really good, I must say. Doing all those old public domain kind of folk songs, traditional songs. So that takes care of the first 4 Shining Time Station releases. Join me in a few weeks. We will talk about the remaining ones. We'll do a little segment on that, and we'll talk about Thomas and the Magic Railroad, which is really the biggest legacy that the show leaves today. And of course, there are many rare or rarer Thomas VHS tapes as well. They could even get their own video if enough people are interested, so we'll see how this video does. But in the meantime, if you have any comments on classic children's media, maybe on VHS or maybe not even on VHS, please do comment below. I'm curious if you have any memories of Thomas or Shining Time. Again, comment them below. I think it'd be a lot of fun to dig out some of our old childhood memories. And thank you for watching. I hope to see you again next time as we talk about Beach Boys rarities. So long for now.